Hey everyone. Thanks everyone for joining. See some familiar names, see some new names. Got a good group here. So thanks everyone for showing up. Can everybody hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up or something in the chat. Yes. Okay. Awesome. Thank you. And then I'm going to put the slides up and I'll ask for another. Can everybody see the slides? And then we should be good to get rolling here. Can everybody see the screen share? No, you cannot. I'm going to resume the share. Okay, I'm sharing now. Can everybody see the screen share? Excellent. All right. Welcome everybody. Let me go back to the beginning here. All right, welcome everybody. It is a beautiful Friday. Thank you for showing up. I appreciate you spending some time on a Friday afternoon. We've got a great group here to talk about some pretty interesting things as far as the challenges of scaling nationally and managing all of the stuff that comes along with that. The basic idea for today is sort of to talk a little bit about deductions, talk a little bit about wholesale, and kind of this big moment that a lot of people get to when they get that first big national PO, or maybe they've done a test with a brand and they're kind of rolling out, and kind of things to look out for, or things to consider as a brand when you're going through that phase. So we've got a great group today, and we are recording the webinar. We'll share a replay via email, so don't feel like you need to sit there and scramble notes the whole time. If you have questions, you can use the Q&A button, or you can drop stuff in the webinar chat. Chat's great, whatever works for you, and we'll address those questions live. So don't wait on those. If you guys have questions, that's going to be the best use of time. We're happy to address questions directly as we go. And hopefully we can get those questions answered for you or give you a perspective on stuff. Just by way of agenda for today, so we'll go through some intros. We'll talk a little bit about core challenges of kind of this moment, and I want to cover a little bit of kind of deductions 101, and then we'll have a discussion around some key themes that we came up with, but it'll be pretty loose and free flowing. And as I mentioned, I definitely want to save some time for Q&A and open it up to you guys kind of whenever you have questions. Don't wait, just drop them in the chat. Feel free to interrupt us and we'll get going. All right. So who's here? So my name's Austin. I'm the co-founder and CEO at a company called Drivepoint. I'll give you a little bit of intro on what we do. And then we're joined by Akash, who's the founder at Glimpse. I'm going to say hi. Make sure your mic's working. There we go. A little mic
Yep.
check.
Hey everyone. Yep.
There. Awesome. Okay. And we've got super excited to have Kaylee here from Little Bucks. Kaylee is the COO there, an awesome brand growing really fast. You want to say hello, Kaylee?
Hello, hello.
Hello. All right. Good stuff. So I'll give you guys a chance to introduce yourselves, but let's start off with Akash. Why don't you give us just like a quick bit of background on yourself, and then tell us a little bit about what you guys are up to at Glimpse, and anything else you want to share.
Yeah, of course. I'm super excited for this. Really excited to go deeper into scaling nationally and how Glimpse can kind of help. Just a quick intro. I'm Akash, one of the founders and the CEO at Glimpse. What we essentially do is help brands that are scaling really fast through retail and wholesale automate their deductions management process. And what that really means, and we'll kind of do a deductions 101 a little bit later, the fees you kind of get from your retailers and distributors. What Glimpse basically does is provide a software and service to help you manage, understand all these deductions, but also fight any invalid deductions that you're getting, and help you get money back. And typically in the industry, what we've seen is almost 2 to 3% of top line can be lost to invalid deductions, and brands are typically, trading away like 20 to 30% of their gross margin to deductions to scale in retail, which we'll go deeper into. We work with a little over 120 brands at this point. Little Bucks is, one of our OG customers that we're super happy to support. And yeah, we started off with a focus on Kayleigh and Unify, which are two big natural distributors, but now we're also helping brands with their Target and Amazon deductions as well.
Awesome. Great stuff. And definitely an area that I think everyone has opportunities to get better and improve. So I love what you guys are up to. I'll give you guys 2 seconds on DrivePoint. Drivepoint is we call it an intelligent finance platform, but basically we focus on helping brands with the forward-looking side of finance. So planning, forecasting, modeling, and typically most people are doing that with what I call Excel and duct tape. You've got a human and an Excel file, and you're trying to pull all that stuff together. And so we're a tech-focused alternative to that setup. We're pulling in all the data into one place, into a common data layer, using that to build great reports, really strong financial models across all three statements, income statement, balance sheet, P&L, help you run all kinds of different scenarios, and lots of new AI stuff around helping to build reports really quickly, helping to actually, sort of talk to your financial model and get new scenarios built. And lucky enough to have some really great customers. You can see them up here. Tons of focus in food and bev, as well as personal care and other places. Graza, Dose, Seek would be some of the bigger customers in food and bev, and then customers like True Classic, Simple Modern, Mad Rabbit, Curology on the skincare and other side. So super. We do is focus on consumer brands. So that's kind of our area of expertise. And then the thing that I'm most proud of our team is like, we pride ourselves on being able to hopefully reduce some costs as opposed to building out a full finance team. But more importantly is help our customers just build better, stronger businesses. And so 75% of our customers see EBITDA go up in year one with us, and the typical increase is about 6.5 percentage points of EBITDA from kind of running scenarios that you can figure out, okay, which are the moves that I should make? Should I focus on CAC? Should I focus on retention? Should I focus on Amazon? Should I focus on wholesale? And helping you put dollar signs next to all those choices so that you can make the best calls when you have those management meetings or those corp board meetings. So that's a little bit about us. Enough sort of SaaS vendor talk. The most interesting thing you guys are probably going to be interested in is hearing from another brand leader and kind of what they're going through. So, Kaylee, I'd love for you to just kind of give a little bit of your background, talk about the brand, talk about where you guys are, channels, distribution, what challenges you're facing, all that good stuff. And I'll probably ask you a couple questions along the way.
Cool. Well, hi everyone. I'm Kayleigh. Thanks for the fun intro. COO of Little Bucks. Prior to joining the team here about a year ago, I had started and scaled my own brand. It was a plant-based ice cream, so lots of experience in frozen and shelf stable, and it's been quite a ride. So yeah, for those that are not familiar with Little Bucks, we make snacks out of buckwheat. We do sprouted buckwheat that we're sourcing direct from American farmers. So super fun, great new superfood. It's grain-free. A lot of people think buckwheat is wheat based on the name, but super nutrient dense, grain-free product that's super fun to start disrupting some of these center store categories. So where we are primarily with distribution right now nationally, we're with Whole Foods and Target. We're also online and Amazon and some other smaller regional chains like H-E-B, Jimbo's, all sorts of natural stores there. And so we've got a lot of additional national launches planned for later this year and beyond. So growing quickly and learning a lot.
So where did you guys start? Did you start online and go into natural and going into mass? Did you start the other way? Tell us a little bit about kind of the journey in terms of channels.
Yeah, so super strategic. Well, for one, started at farmers markets, which I think a lot of brands do. And so from a funding perspective, it's always been pretty bootstrapped. So going where your customers are is super important, especially when you're looking at cash flow. So starting at farmers markets, building the demand, building the awareness, and then really the real launch for the brand was in 2017, launching into one region of Whole Foods. And so that's kind of the big time when you first start to then onboard with distributors and learn about chargebacks and playing at shelf and TPRs and promos and all those fun things. But yeah, that was back in 2017. And then we launched nationally. We launched a different product. It was the Little Bucks line. And then Cluster Bucks launched a year or two later. And we went nationally with that product line just last year.
Awesome. And then as you guys, had you done wholesale before when you were running your previous brand in ice cream? So you knew a little bit about what you were getting yourself into with the channel.
Yeah, good question. I knew enough to be dangerous. I was a sales rep for another wholesale food
Okay.
brand for that. So I had seen, and that was really helpful. I had established some relationships with some buyers and knew the process of ultimately selling into a store. But those were certainly just small kind of health food stores and not really at the category management level of something like a Whole Foods.
Yeah. And what was your approach to Whole Foods, or like how did you guys get that account initially? What was your wedge? How did you think about like rolling out? How much was luck? How much was strategy? How much was sort of like the right time, right place?
I think it was 99% force and willpower to get onto shelves of Whole Foods. So I know Emily, the founder, she basically just forced her way into the headquarters and left some samples there next to the buyer's desk. I myself had to actually go alongside one of my other friends who had a product line in Whole Foods already. So he had a standing meeting and just was fortunate enough to just join him for his annual review and introduce my product. So it does take a lot of art when you're new and trying to get something new into the market, and you just have to be extremely persistent. So I think it's a lot of networking and relationship building, and ultimately, you kind of got to force yourself in there.
Yeah, I mean, I will definitely I want to get to deductions, but you got to tell that story just briefly. Like, so you walk into the
Yeah.
meeting, your buddy brings you in, you're sitting there, he's doing his like national review. Are they like, who's this? Like, what's going on? And like, how
Yeah.
did that morph into, like, was it the same buyer? Like, how did you get from there to on shelf?
It was the same buyer. He was in beverage, so we were into t totally different categories, but
Okay.
then it was regional buying versus category specific, or they covered a couple categories on a regional basis. So it was ultimately the regional buyer, and it's actually the same buyer that brought both myself and Lil Bucks into the Midwest region to start. So we do love him and very fond of that buyer. But yeah, I was in the meeting and I got the opportunity to pitch the product and why it was different and why it was special and how it was thought out. And I think one of the things I do specifically remember from that meeting was him saying, "Okay, I do feel like I want to give you a chance because it is rare. My background is actually in finance and consulting." And so he said, "It's rare that I see a product that is like this, where it's very nutrition focused, very creative, very thoughtful, farmers market style product with someone driving it that actually knows the P&L, and I have a little bit more confidence that you could be successful on shelf here." So, they're looking for specific things, and yes, it does have to be the right time. You have to get lucky. There has to be, a moment for whatever the trend is based on what your product is. But you do really have to build that relationship with the buyer, and they really have to believe in you at that early stage because it's so difficult. And we know the stats of virtually no one makes it to $1 million. These early stage brands are just so challenging. And so that's kind of the space on a regional level that you're playing in. You're sub 100,000 probably. And so it's a big
Yeah.
risk for them to take you on and invest their dollars to giving you that shelf space. And so you really have to come with a lot of conviction that you're going to bring some customers and dollars their way.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love a couple of things about that story. One is making your own luck, like in more than one way, right? So just
Yeah.
figuring out how to get the meeting and doing it. And I think just the grittiness of that is amazing. Two is like, so much of it does come down to personal connection still. We all want to believe that, the world kind of works differently, I think sometimes. And especially when I talk to young brands, they're like, how do I get into Whole Foods, right? And I think about it as this sort of like faceless, you
Mhm.
know, behemoth store. And it's like, well, no, there's a buyer. Like you have to get to know the guy or the woman who represents your
Yeah.
category, and really understand what goes on. But so much of it comes down to being a good salesperson and being able to find the people behind it, which I think is awesome. And the best buyers I've found that I've met, and I haven't met a ton, but the best buyers are like naturally curious people who are always looking for new stuff and like really know it. And so I think, and they don't bite, yes, they know that they're being sold, but for the most part, they're eager to look for young brands and eager to help people to the extent that they can. So a good reminder there. And then the last piece was just sort of that insight about, you being, or the way that you phrased it around like they are making an investment in you by giving you the shelf space, right? Which I think is such a good perspective to have in terms of approaching them with that mindset and saying like, no, they literally think about that slot on the shelf as something that generates dollars, right? And so for them to give you that real estate is making an investment in you and the belief in your brand, which I think is a super important point of view to bring as you're getting to retail and really be thoughtful about how you approach it. Um, okay. The topic for today was like scaling nationally, right? So two things, and Kaylee, maybe you can kick it off, and then Akash, you can come in. Like, as you made that transition, so you get into Whole Foods, you're there regionally, you make the transition to nationally. What changed on your end? And then like as you're learning about all that and certainly talking about TPRs and deductions and all that stuff, maybe just sort of like once you get to that point, give us deductions 101 from a brand perspective, because I'm sure that's going to be part of the journey from regional to national.
Yeah, regional to national is definitely a huge lift, and you're essentially 5 to 10xing your business depending on where you were prior to that national launch. It's wonderful in a lot of ways, especially with a partner like Whole Foods. What happens is you essentially open up all the distribution centers, almost all of them on the UNFI side, service Whole Foods. And typically for brands, that's a really difficult process to get unlocked. To get into one of those new DCs, you have to build up enough demand or have someone essentially anchor that distribution warehouse for you in order to open it up and sell to the customers out of that location. But getting something like a Whole Foods National will just open that for you as well as anchor it. So you're not really being held to the case movements up front. There's no way they can kick you out of that warehouse. So it ultimately gives you a little bit more time to build your business out of each of those spots. But yeah, a ton to think about logistically, cash flow management, it ups the ante on every front. And, depending on how you're set up with the distributors, you might have one or two different warehouses depending on where you're manufacturing everything. But yeah, you really start to get into the nitty-gritty of what are the costs here? How much do we have to be forecasting? What are our anticipated velocity and turn rates? And what does that look like? And how do we make sure we're really supporting this product in all regions, which can be tough to hit on a marketing level. Your dollars just start to get diluted pretty quickly when you're talking to the nation versus just something like Chicago, Illinois. So yeah, tons and tons to be thinking about there, and super happy to answer specific questions. But the deduction side, I think once you get into that level of business with the distributors, comes at you really fast. I think a lot of people struggle with forecasting and cash flow management because they sell a PO, it was $30,000, and they end of the day end up seeing 17 back, and like, where did that money go? And when you're at this stage launching nationally for the first time, your team is probably 3 or 4 people on a good day. And so there's just so many demands placed on you, and while cash flow is huge, going through the deductions is so time intensive and usually falls down on the list of priorities in terms of just making sure the product is there and available and turning. So you can lose a lot of money. It's a really leaky place in the business, and so we found we didn't have the resources to be on top of that. And we weren't yet at the level of business where hiring almost like a full-time person to manage that would pay for itself just yet. So Glimpse was super huge for us, to be able to just both keep an eye on it and fight those chargebacks and things that were invalid and win some money back, but also working directly with our accounting team to make sure that all of these chargebacks were being properly coded, because that's also a really laborious process of getting all of our questions from our accountant, like, what was this chargeback and what was it for, and how do we categorize this, and was it a promo or was it a lumper fee? What do we do with this amount here? So yeah, it's just been super huge working with Glimpse so far.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess first of all, I thank you for the kind words. One, I guess, question maybe just for the audience, like taking a step back, could you kind of explain, and I can also chime in as well, but like the relationship between like unlocking a unified, unlocking DCs, and then getting those like accounts like a Whole Foods in parallel, and then like I think that would help then set the stage. We can go deeper into like things like the cash flow, like who is the end stakeholder that you're working with, et cetera. Just to like sort of set the like, landscape.
Yeah, it's interesting because at my last company, when we were regional, we were doing self-distribution. So it is actually challenging to get in with these national distributors, and they're expensive, but also they're investing in you and putting you in the system and kind of taking a chance there. So it's another one of those partnerships that you kind of have to sell. And so when we got bumped, I guess, into a couple regions, that's where ultimately where we were. It did take our Whole Foods buyer coordinating with UNFI to say, hey, we'd like this brand to be distributed through you. We want to grow their store presence, and it's not something that they can handle on a DSD individual distribution level. And so that was kind of our first leg in there. And then again, in order to work with UNFI, I'm using them as an example, but there's Kayleigh and there's some other, larger distributors that most food brands will work with. But UNFI specifically, if you want an account, let's say Central Market in Texas, but you're not distributed out of that DC yet, it doesn't really make sense to present to them or try and, there's no way for you to get that product there. And so it is kind of this push and pull. And so from a strategy perspective, we ultimately would look at who has enough doors in their chain that can ultimately anchor a DC or get us the right amount of volume to sort of unlock that DC, because the UNFI buyers will say, yeah, okay, 75 doors, that's enough. But if you don't get one of those technically anchor accounts, you can also work the independent store market and try and get like 100 commitments. Okay, we have 100 stores that want to bring in our product next month. Can we open this DC with you and expect to see the volume pull through? So a couple ways that you can get in there and onboarded with them, but yeah, it's definitely a grind early on, and the path of least resistance for us did seem to win approval with one of those anchor accounts.
Yeah, no, this makes a ton of sense. And yeah, one note, I guess, for the audience is kind of this like chicken and egg with like a Whole Foods and Unify, where the deductions actually come through Unify as like the middleman back to a brand like Little Bucks, where um it adds like an extra step of complexity as well because they're like interspersed and blended with all of the other accounts that Little Bucks is servicing through Unify as well. Um, I guess kind of tied to that, and then now sort of like laying out the landscape a little bit with like Unify or like a distributor like that being a player. Would just love to get like the quick 101 from your end in terms of like from a brand's perspective, like what is that first foray in understanding what deductions even are and like what, yeah, like
That's what I
that I
was
can
gonna ask.
chime
Like,
in.
yeah, take us through
Yeah.
how 30 grand turns into 17
Yeah,
grand, right?
yeah.
Like what is that what actually happens there?
Yeah, you're this brand new brand and you're really excited and you get an account like Whole Foods, and so you get this first PO from UNFI 30 grand and say, okay, this is all the inventory they want. They're obviously purchasing for Whole Foods and maybe a handful of others. So you get that ready, you ship it out. You invoice UNFI for the amount that you're really hoping to get. And then, simultaneously though, you had maybe set up a discount program with UNFI called an off invoice where you give a little bit of a discount to the distributor, or maybe you've set up a promo with Whole Foods where we're going to do $1 off for these 2 weeks. And so as it kind of flows through, you ship this product to UNFI. Whole Foods essentially cuts their own POs, gets their level of product, and then they're taking that discount at the register. So whatever your sale or promo was, they're scanning that $1 off. And so then they're charging that back to UNFI. Like, we're not gonna, this was our discount fee. And so then UNFI is pushing that back to you as the brand that signed up for that promo. And so promos are a big one, but there's also all sorts of fees that Akash is probably way more familiar with than I am. But there's, lumper fees and things at the delivery point, or spoilage chargebacks. If you have inventory that went out of date in the warehouse and they had to donate it, they're going to charge you back for that. All sorts of things really happening at that distributor warehouse level. And so ultimately you get this check from them. So you had invoiced them and then you get this check and you see the number at the top and then you see the number at the bottom, and there's like 17 rows in between the top and the bottom. And it's all of these little $100, $2,000 type fees. And they all have these little codes next to them. And then UNFI will give you this whole sheet of here's what all these codes mean. And that's where we got lost in the sauce, because we don't want to look at all those codes and figure out what all of these are. So we would rely on Glimpse to say, hey, yeah, this was your Whole Foods promo, ran this week. And then Glimpse would check our contract and say, did you authorize a promo of this much for these 2 weeks? And is this a valid chargeback? or not type thing. But that's the brand experience there.
Okay, super helpful from the brand side because I think that's the way you described it is I would say exactly how it is of like there's a number at the top of the page, there's a number at the bottom of the page, there's a whole bunch of gobbledygook in the middle, and I don't really know how to line that stuff up with the conversation I had with my buyer and the 6 emails I got from my UNFI rep that all had different numbers in them on the go in. So like Akash, break it down for us a little bit. Like, okay, what's going on in there? How are those things getting inputted into the system? Like, how does the retailer talk to UNFI? And like, how the heck do you guys figure out where all the pieces go? And like,
Yeah.
put the puzzle together.
Yeah, of course. Sort of, yeah, like very in line with like essentially from a brand's point of view, what you're getting at the end of the day is that check, and like that becomes the source of truth for all these different fees. But there's so many different categories of fees that a brand has that can come from Whole Foods that's passed through Unify. So there's like the promo related deductions, which end up being a high percentage of the deductions a brand gets, which essentially is like almost the source of truth for, or is like what they're saying is the source of truth tied to like any marketing program you agree to. Then there's also other categories of deductions like tied to like supply chain, compliance, etc. So for example, like one very common type of deduction that a brand gets is like they shipped 10,000 units because that's what they were told to ship. But then they get a deduction saying that they only shipped like 9,000 units. But a brand typically has like a document called like a bill of lading, like a freight document that shows that they did ship in full. It's like signed by the warehouse, etc. And that's like a common type of invalid deduction. So every distributor, or if you ship directly to a retailer, typically has anywhere from anywhere from like 50 to like 200 different types of unique deduction codes that they're getting. And they all live in different portals or inbox. If we're using the example of the Unify, their deductions typically come in an email. So you get like one email with like your check that has like all these different line items. Then you're getting separate emails that have different deduction backup documents, which is their reasoning for why these fees may have come in. So what we basically do is integrate directly with the inbox or pull from a portal and essentially create like a data layer of like structured data to now help better like make this into a tabular format, make it easier to understand. And then that's when it diverges into like two workflows where like we work really closely with Little Bucks' like accounting team to help make this data usable, because then they then have to reconcile in the accounting system of like, oh, that initial $30,000 PO, there's like a credit tied to it. And these are the reasons why that $13,000 was deducted. And the other thing, which is I think where part of the like beauty of like the subject matter expertise is we have a team of in-house experts where they like know what every single type of deduction is. And we essentially turn that into a process to identify invalid deductions, et cetera. And I think that's one of the big complexities with deductions and cash flow management in general, especially as you're scaling, and that like there's all this nuance on a per distributor, per retailer basis of what their fees might even mean in that first place. And I think that's like one of the big difficulties in scaling for sure.
Yeah, super interesting. Thank you for breaking it down. I think like first of all, how do those in the case of like the misships or something like that, like how does that even happen? Is that just somebody fat fingering the number into the unified portal on their side, or like how do these? Because like you kind of want to assume best intentions to some degree that people just aren't like generally trying to screw you. Although there's probably they'll probably err on the side of we'd rather overcharge than undercharge. But yeah, how does that happen? Is it straight up just manual errors or?
Yeah, it seems like I mean like there's still like that's a lot of
I know there's a
things
lot
to
of
like
mystery in that
speculate.
still, but like, yeah,
Yeah. But it does seem like by being a middleman, at least at the distributor level, retailers, it's different. I think there's
yeah,
just a lot of sources of data in different departments. Like we've even seen cases where like if a brand does escalate it to their buyer and ask like, why are we getting all these deductions? They don't even like a buyer at Unify's best interest or a rep's best interest is to help a brand. So they may not even
right,
know why these deductions came in the first place. It's
yeah,
kind of like the whole world of like AR versus AP, where
yeah,
it's like today it's just like humans on both sides kind of like inputting this information and that back and
yeah,
forth kind of existing. But it seems like that's where like a lot of the error kind of comes in. Like we've even seen examples where we can like flag like you got a deduction with a different brand that you don't even that's not even tied to you that just
right,
came in. It's like a $7,000 charge or something like that.
right.
So yeah, it
That.
seems like, yeah, exactly. So it seems like there's a
Literally
lot
like
of different reasons.
someone else's charge ended up on your bill, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, like $10,000. And even with the back and forth over 4 months, we still couldn't get that resolved. You know, it was Emily, our founder, trying to go back. You can only touch it like once a week, and then you're busy and you're like, hey, remember that? And then at some point you don't have the time to get it back. So people are like, oh, you
Right.
just lost $10,000. And it's like, I can't even afford to fight that anymore. Yeah, we lost it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's fascinating in that just like there is, again, like assuming best intentions on all sides, this stuff just slips, right? Like there are just still cracks in the system of that coming back. And so, but it's real dollars. And so making sense of it is super important. Um, I want to open it up to questions for the audience. We've talked a bunch. Does anyone have any questions on like basic deduction stuff or any questions about getting into retailers or anything that we've talked about so far? Feel free to throw a hand up or drop something in the chat and I can unmute anybody. All right. Looks like we've got an audience full of pros. Okay, so I'm curious, Kayleigh, and maybe you know this offhand, maybe you don't, but like as you're doing the work of taking these deductions and Glimpse is helping you actually journal them into the accounting system, how do you think about like what are the buckets or the GL accounts in your accounting system? And even if it's not the specific accounts, like how do you think about the importance of each different type of chargeback or deduction? And then where do you put them in the P&L? Do you put them in different places? Do you put them all in gross to net? How do you think about doing it?
Yeah, I think the most important bucket for us is the promo piece. And so typically as a growing CPG brand, we do invest heavily there. So we typically look to spend around 20% of our top line revenue on these promos, pretty close to shelf. So that's really the area we want to make sure that we're really dialed and tracking these properly. Some of the other chargebacks we'll get are things like, again, short ships or something not lining up originally with the PO. We also want to pay super close attention to that. We actually have a short ship line chargeback on our P&L. We have that promo slot on our P&L. And then we have just kind of like a general catch-all just manufacturer fees because of some of those delivery and different items like that. But yeah, ultimately the biggest one for us is the promo piece and making sure that that's correct and right and within budget.
Yeah. Okay. And then do all three of those lines sit in between gross and net on your P&L?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's the way that we think about the world and recommend doing it. I think that's sort of like standard practice. It's always been interesting to me when you have an omni-channel business and you start looking across D2C and Amazon and wholesale, like that what's considered like normal doesn't necessarily line up against these channels. Like in many ways, the promo spend is your biggest marketing lever in the retail channel, right? And yet it sits above net revenue, whereas like you would never do that in the other P&Ls. So just something for folks to keep in mind as they think about sort of comparing net revenue margins or gross margins as they go down the P&L on a channel by channel basis. Chad has a question. Chad, I'll unmute you. Do you want to just ask it directly? Or sorry, I apologize, Chris. Go for it. We can't hear you. I'm happy to ask it for you. I'll ask it for you. And if you get your mic working, you can give us some color. But Chad or Chris says, curious to hear about ways to streamline the backup request process when trying to understand and dispute these deductions when the backup is either lost in an inbox or just straight wasn't provided by UNFI. So how can you make that process smoother?
Yeah, I can kind of talk about it real quick at a fun, like the way it works, and then also I guess like what Glimpse kind of does. But essentially, the remittance that you're getting paid is the source of truth that you have. Like those 17 line items, if you can essentially individualize those, today you'd have to manually go find each backup, try to stitch that together, see what's missing, and then request backups for the remaining. In the way I just described, it's a really good, opportunity for automation and AI, where what Glimpse basically does is we take those remittance as the first step, turn it into like a tabular format, extract out all those invoice codes, then search through the inbox and find the backups that are there, attach it to that invoice code in our dashboard, and then anything that's missing, we essentially request backups for you. So we essentially always have a flow running where we'll request missing backups and then use like our dashboard table as like the source of truth. But ultimately at the core, the remittance that you're receiving, just having all of those is kind of the source of truth you have for backup requests. And then once you kind of have all of those, it gives you all of the information and visibility you need to then validate the deduction or dispute it accordingly. So you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. Chris, did that answer your question? Still no mic, but let us know if you have a follow-up. We're happy to get to it. Okay, Emma, I just added you. Do you want to ask your question, Emma?
Sure. I was wondering if you often get your TPR chargebacks many months later. And we have a bit of a different setup where we don't go direct with UNFI. We use a broker. And therefore, I have to rely on the broker to be doing all the chargebacks and all that. But I get some December chargebacks in April 2025 sometimes, which is a bit of a problem to analyze the result from last year.
Yeah, that's a bit of a delay, but I would say, yeah, for TPRs, we do because they have to ultimately go through the scan data. So for those 2 weeks that it was run, then Whole Foods essentially compiles how much volume went through the register at that discount and then charge us back for it after the fact. Whereas something like an off invoice with your distributor does flow through a little bit quicker because they're ultimately taking that discount right at the front on that PO when they're first buying your product from the warehouse.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Alex, I'll unmute you. Do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. Yeah, I guess initially I thought this was for Kaylee, but for anyone really, do you keep track of deductions purely on a deduction type level, or do you ever create almost like a mini P&L by retailer, especially for like a key account like Whole Foods for you?
Yeah, we do both. And I think what we've also found to be really helpful is by class channel as well. So wholesale, mass, Amazon, direct, specialty shops. But typically in that wholesale channel, perhaps Whole Foods would be like 80% of your business if you're early on and growing with a national account. So yeah, we do absolutely run it on a retailer by retailer level as we kind of look to assess our performance and ultimately the ROI at some of those retailers. So we have found it really helpful to kind of chop it up in different ways like that.
Kayleigh, do you have those dimensions in your, what do you use for accounting? Do you use QuickBooks or NetSuite?
Yeah, we're using QuickBooks.
Okay. And do you have those, do you have a customer and a channel dimension in QuickBooks that you actually adhere to?
Yeah, we do. And
Okay.
we do all of our AR AP through a software called Settle, which is kind of like bill.com. And within that program, we're able to, for every invoice and bill we pay, classify it as what is the channel and class for that, so that everything is coming in properly coded.
Yeah, that's awesome. That makes it nice and clean if you can do it that way. I was gonna just add to that, Alex, like we definitely recommend doing the same thing that Kayleigh's doing. So we do on the forecast side, and I'll just share it quickly so you guys can see it. But like this is the Drivepoint model or a version of it. So you can see we have a wholesale channel tab, which is kind of rolling up the whole tab. But then for each individual retailer as well, you would have a full P&L by SKU. So you're looking at the same data all the way across and seeing both kind of actual with doors, units, scans, velocity, all of that stuff. And then, having your baseline units and then having all of your promo dollars sort of calculated in your promo length, promo depth, promo lift, basically on a per SKU basis. So most of our customers that have major accounts will break out, a full tab or a full P&L for each major retailer. And I think it's really important to do that, especially as, most people will start with have an anchor retailer or something that's 50 to 75% of their channel revenue. And so it makes sense to start there and then kind of lump the long tail into one catch-all for long tail natural or whatever that is for you guys. But definitely a good exercise, because often I think it's like, Kayleigh, I would say you guys are, from my experience at least, kind of ahead of the curve in terms of having that level of granularity all the way into the P&L or all the way into the GL level. But you know, it can be very important to understand which accounts you're losing money in and which accounts you're making money in, obviously. Cool. Any other questions before we keep going here? Alex, does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. Okay. I mean, Kayleigh, just kind of thinking about, like, you know, how all of this factors into your plan. So you guys have gone through this journey. You went, you know, regional, now you're national. You've started to get a handle on kind of what's going on with deductions. You feel like you have good sense of the historical data. How are you using that data or that level of visibility by account to actually think about forecasting these accounts, thinking about trade spend, thinking about promo? Like, how do you think about um, how that lever drives the velocity and the sales in each of these retailers?
Yeah, it's probably the most challenging piece of businesses in CPG at this stage is the forecasting piece of everything. And so ultimately we try and get as clean of data as we can to be building these out. So essentially looking at our scan data at Whole Foods, for example, to get velocity numbers that we think we can rely on and grow to over time. And then looking at kind of different awards on the retailer level to ultimately build out that roadmap. And then again, I guess from a promo level, we try and keep it pretty tight to our budget. So that 20% of top line, I guess trailing 12 essentially would be our roadmap for that, running the ROI on where it's most important to spend. But I think probably the biggest piece that we lean on is, again, at this stage with such tight cash flow, you really want to promote as close to the shelf as you can. So TPRs and demos, and if you can afford it, some off-shelf placements around the store, even merchandising has been a great, great investment for us. Anything you can do to really control and optimize what's going on right at the retailer has been super helpful for us. So yeah, a million things to think about on the looking forward piece of it. But I think a lot of brands at this stage don't necessarily have access to spins or any of that syndicated data. So really working to understand what data you can get, which again, someone like Whole Foods will give you the direct scan data, which is so major in these early innings. But if not, you can sometimes get that data from your broker, or you can back into it with the ship data you have through the distributors and where they're going and when and how frequently. So art and science there for sure.
And how are you getting your Whole Foods data today? Do you have a data provider that's pulling it, or are you pulling it directly from the portal yourselves? How are you guys doing it?
Yeah, we pull it directly from the portal ourselves, and then Emily, our founder, has built out a pretty intricate web of spreadsheets to really be monitoring that very closely in terms of what stores have scanned this week versus last week, how many unique stores are scanning, what's the velocity on a SKU level and regional level, to really be monitoring our performance, which has been super helpful because launches never go as you think they're going to go. And so having that level of visibility into exactly what flavors are scanning and where is so major. We did have an issue a couple months ago where we lost some shelf placement just to a merchandising issue at the retail level. And so we hired a merchandising team to go in there, and we could track, week over week. Okay, we lost 30% of the doors, 5% are back this week. Here's the region that was hit hard, and really kind of watch that recovery happen in real time. So yeah, anything you can do to get an eye on what's going on at that store level is so major.
Yeah, I think that's a key thing. Like, a lot of times what we see is people who, and we just encountered this with a customer, especially when they're opening new doors or new accounts, it's sort of like, at least even if they know better, they mentally have the number that they get traded in, basically. So they're like, oh, I'm in 400 doors. And then it's like, well, have you scanned in 400 doors? Like, do you have any
Yeah.
idea if you're actually on shelf or you're doing that? And usually the delta, once we show people the scan data, is like, is definitely less than that.
Yeah.
And just quick shout out, if people are looking for that data but don't want to pay up for a spins or a Nielsen, we do offer access to the scan data via Drivepoint. So if you guys are, if you've built your own intricate web of spreadsheets, more power to you. But if you want it in a clean kind of weekly units view, we've got it here, and this will automatically pull into the forecasting side as well. Kaylee, how do you think about forecasting trade? Like obviously you've got that like high level 20% target. Are you breaking it down into those buckets of saying, okay, we want this much to be TPR, we want this much to be tag, we want this much to be sampling? Are you giving that budget to individual sales reps and letting them kind of build their plan? Are you thinking about it as weeks and days in depth, or like what's your thought process when you start doing that that planning aspect?
Yeah, we're really looking at it on kind of a 12-month rolling basis. So, how are we hitting our budget over that period? And then we do, break it out, usually about 15% to TPRs. So a lot of money just going straight to the shelf and what we're doing there. And then we do have some separate allocations for whether it be couponing or demo. But again, have found the most bang for the buck and ability to really kind of look at the data on the TPR side. And just another call out there is to really maximize your dollars. We ultimately try and pair that at the same time as OIs with the distributor. So if we are offering an OI, sometimes you get strong-armed into doing that with your distributors, running a TPR at the same time so that discount is kind of getting translated and transferred through. It won't always if you're just running a smaller OI. So yeah, just trying to be smart with the timing of it. But yeah, we do ultimately create the budget on an annual basis and then separate out this is how much for TPRs, and then the rest is to be kind of discretionary between coupons, Instagram, Instacart ads, and demos.
Okay. And then say a little bit more about that last, because I think that was a really great nugget of like timing up your OI and your TPR. Like, how would you structure that? So you're saying like, okay, Unifi's in the example I think you were giving is like Unify is basically demanding that I give them an OI or whatever. So I'm going to give it to them, but I'm also going to make sure that at the same time that I give Whole Foods, the additional budget. So it might seem counterintuitive because you're almost giving away more total trade, but you're like, I just want to make sure that I'm getting the benefit of that OI, and that's just not a fee, like that. At least some of that is making its way to shelf.
Yeah, exactly. I think
Okay.
sometimes the distributor will say this is going to be passed on to the retailer, or these savings are going somewhere, this discount is going somewhere, and then it's not. And so, especially if it's kind of a lower percentage. So, yeah, we do try and coordinate that at the same time to make sure that those discounts are in fact being lumped together and passed along to the retailer. And I think, also with OIs to be mindful of is that the distributor could be doing a lot of over purchasing during that time, again, depending on where you are in your scale, but you want to make sure that they're not stocking up at that cheaper price and then sitting on inventory and kind of pushing on your shelf life by having too much inventory there that they purchase at a discount is something that we will also monitor very closely and have data around what is our position in each of the DCs. And it is a lot of data analysis, but just making sure that they don't have too many weeks on hand and kind of holding out on their purchasing cycles based on when we're giving them a discount or not.
Yeah, I love that point. I mean, I think one of the reasons, so usually when customers come to us, they're not necessarily forecasting wholesale as granular as kind of the template that I just showed, where you're actually going through like velocity data by SKU, and like building up from the scan level all the way forward. They might have like a line item for shipments, and it's sort of like trended based on historical shipments, and that's kind of the level that they're going at. And I think the most important thing that I think about in terms of having that forecast is it gives you, it may not be right, but it gives you a proof point to be able to look at the retailer and be like, my forecast is saying something different than your buy, right? Based on what I'm seeing. So either you're wrong and your math is wrong, and we should have a conversation about that, or at least recognizing, to your point, like that they may not have the same motivations as you, right? Like your motivations are to get as much product through shelf at the highest price possible, but they may have a counterintuitive, which is like, hey, I have a bunch of open to buy in this category right now, and I want to stack as much as I can. But I think it's super important to bring your own core perspective about what's going to move from a forecasting lens so that you can have that healthy sort of debate with the buyer, because it's very common that we find that there's essentially over ordering. And like, I think there's this this like first order perception of like, oh, they're ordering more, like I'm going to make more money, like
Right.
that's good, right? And so it's very natural to be like, sure, you can have more, instead of realizing that like what they're doing is just taking cash out of your bank account and putting it into their warehouse, and like it may or may not actually turn back into cash in your bank account again, like.
Yeah, you're gonna see that as a chargeback in 4 months. So yeah, it's pretty crazy place to be. And I think to your point, yeah, just really knowing your data and communicating with those buyers, because recently we had that merchandising issue on a national level, lost about 30% of our facings. And as we were climbing back, UNFI was ultimately working on whatever algorithm they have, but over the last 4 to 8 weeks, you're turning at X. So we only need to buy for X. But we know we're sending merchandisers in there. We're
Right.
we're rapidly recovering the shelf placement plus adding new off-shelf placements all over. And so, we're about to 3 to 5X what you guys were purchasing over the last 8 weeks. And if we don't have it in there, we can't make the sale. So it was a lot of over communication and giving them our forecasting, because it's not even going to be coming through Whole Foods because they, that's a standard, forecast for them. So it was here's the situation, here's what happened, here's why it was low, here's why we believe it's going to be higher. We want to make sure that we're stacked on the inventory position to support this rapid growth. And they were, really lovely. So establishing the relationships with not only your retailer buyers but also your distributor buyers is so important, and so helpful, because now we kind of have that level of trust where they know as a brand we are monitoring our inventory position at each of their warehouses. We are pretty dialed on our forecast. We know the spikes that are coming, and they don't want to be short on their inventory. They don't
Right.
lose money either. So we are helping them and working together. So it's a nice synergy there once you can get it.
Yeah, it goes back to kind of the original comment from the very first time that you were speaking to that buyer of like, hey, I like the fact that there's someone on your side who knows how to manage a P&L and is really being thoughtful and careful and thinking about the numbers and the forecast behind that. Because I think it helps on the forecast side too. And like, we're our sort of killer app is scenario planning, and I'm always encouraging our customers to be like, it's okay, like run the 3 scenarios, run low, medium, high, and like bring the chart to your next meeting and be like, well, here's the deal. Like, I think that our baseline case is this. If we hit the velocity lifts that we're thinking from all of the promos that we have planned, it's this. And if we knock it out of the park, it's this. But like in all cases, you should fall in this range, right? And I think that they, you know, for the most part, probably aren't, most customers are not bringing that level of sophistication to that call with their buyer. And so I think it gives you have more influence, I think, than sometimes you think in terms of being able to actually influence their buys by presenting a strong case for your numbers or your plan or whatever those things are.
Totally.
Awesome. Well, we're almost at time here. Are there any other questions from the audience? All right. Well, we can give everybody a couple of minutes back here, I think, if that's the case. Akash, any final words or sort of words of wisdom for the group here on either launching nationally, pitfalls to make out? Like what would you give us as the last nuggets?
Yeah. Well, first of all, yeah, this was awesome. Just even I feel like I learned a lot just in this conversation. But yeah, I mean, I guess if, from my perspective, if I had to share anything, it was just have a really tight deductions process from day one. I think like one, it helps having deductions essentially as your actuals to like tie back to your promotions, etc., is super important. But then two, there is like a lot of money that is left on the table, especially that grows pretty proportionally as you scale. That like 2 to 3% of top line number, I think is like pretty accurate, and it's like pretty consistent across all channels as well. Like if you're in like Walmart and Target and Costco, like the percentage of deductions and inbound deductions will end up being pretty consistent, even if especially on the supply chain and compliance side. So having a tight process from day one is super important. And yeah, if anyone's interested in a demo, like Glimpse, definitely happy to chat about that, but also can like advisory there as well. And yeah, I think scaling nationally is awesome. Seeing your product on shelf in any part of the country is awesome, but definitely the challenge. I think it's like if you do things operationally correct, it definitely makes it easier. So
Awesome. All right, then Kaylee, what's next for this year? Like, what's the big milestone for 2025? Where should people go buy the product to help make sure that your velocities get up? What's top of mind?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, lots of exciting things in the pipeline. We have a big rebrand coming, so very excited about that. Nice little refresh and facelift on our packaging across the board. And then we are looking to launch a new product towards the end of this year, so that also is very exciting for us. And then, yeah, Whole Foods would be the best place to find us nationwide. We have a call out there is with all of that merchandising, issues we were seeing, we have moved from the granola set over to the snack set. So if you are familiar with us and you do buy the product, we are no longer in granola. You can find us in snacks.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to everyone for coming today. We really appreciate it. Thank you to Kaylee and thank you to Akash for coming. Go buy some cluster bucks at Whole Foods. If you need help with deductions, set up a demo with Akash. If you need help with forecasting, getting stuff granular, give us a shout. We'd love to take a look, and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks everyone for coming.
Awesome.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much.
Talks, guys.